So it's end of the year time. It is now time to look back a little bit on 2024. This is Alex from Los Angeles.
And this is Karan from Los Angeles. Welcome to Movies That Shaped Us. We're two longtime friends who grew up on opposite ends of the globe with very different backgrounds, but were both shaped and are still being shaped by the movies we see and love. So yeah, like Alex mentioned, this is our end of year retrospective episode. Alex, tell our listeners, what do we mean by that? Because this is not our top movies of 2024, or is it?
It is not. This
Yes.
it's a little annual tradition we've had. Our longtime listeners will recall this is the third time we've now done this. So what we do is look back on the year and what were our experiences like during 2024 and what were the movies that we saw. Maybe they're new movies this year, maybe they're not, that we saw that encapsulates 2024. And I definitely was fun. I always enjoy this episode and this kind of thought. It helps me do some kind of self-reflection, rethink about the year, and then also focus on a lot of older movies that maybe I saw for the first time or went back and visited again and had a new meaning because of things that were going on in my life and in the world in 2024. So I don't know. I find this really fun and sort of part of a New Year's tradition that I enjoy doing with you. What about you?
I love this too, because listeners who've been with us for a while, like when we started this podcast, it was very much a reflection of how movies have shaped us. I mean, hence the title, right? Of course, as we've entered this year, we've taken different formats and focused more on new releases and filmmakers and things like that. And still is very personal to obviously who we are and how these filmmakers and movies have shaped us. But when we started, it was very much about moments, people in our lives. So I like this episode because it's sort of a remnant of where we started in a way. And then, like you said, it's a great way of just thinking about the whole year, important highlights. And yeah, it's our way of kind of just looking back through movies, which I hope listeners find interesting and are thinking about what movies would define their 2024 as they're listening through this episode.
Yeah, me too. Hopefully listeners can enjoy as we go on. And just a note as well, Karan, you mentioned about top movies of the year. We will cover that
Yeah.
later on in early in next year. We'll talk about the movies that we liked in 2024. So if people are looking for that, wait a little bit longer. It'll come. We'll give our thoughts on the year in film, but this is the year in our lives through film.
Yeah. And I would say, this is a time when every outlet, every podcast is putting together top 10 list, top 5 list of movies in 2024. I like to think that our list is a little bit sort of different. It's a bit of a zag from what everybody's doing, which is more about how movies define the year. It doesn't matter when these movies were released. So I like that we have our own sort of tradition, and it's not yet another list where the top 5 movies of the year show up.
Right.
I mean,
No, I
how
agree.
many times are you going to see Anora on a list?
Right, exactly. Maybe you'll see it again on our lists in the spring. Who knows? But yeah, I do like this. It's just a little different take that, like you said earlier,
Yeah.
fits really into the format and themes of this show, especially the previous two seasons where we're very much focused on this type of format. So let's get into it then. Why don't you start it off, Karan? What is your number 3 movie that shaped your 2024?
So my number 3 is Sunset Boulevard from 1950, directed and written by Billy Wilder, starring William Holden, Gloria Swanson. Everybody knows what this movie is, but I'll give a quick logline. A screenwriter develops a dangerous relationship with a faded film star determined to make a triumphant return. So obviously I've seen this movie many times before, but listeners who followed us might have noticed that in my intro now, I'm in LA as well. And that happened in the beginning of 2024. So, I've lived here before. This is where Alex and I met years ago when I was here previously. So it's a bit of a return to this town. And obviously, being close here in person with Alex and other friends from the past, but also being back in movie land, like this is no matter what, I think this town will always represent the magic of movies and the hustle that comes with making movies and the downfall and the heartache and the blood, sweat, and tears and the delight and the joy, So this town will always represent that to me. And I wanted to put Sunset Boulevard because no movie in my mind captures that push and pull and the love and the trauma that people feel with this town better than Sunset Boulevard. So I'll give my thoughts on the movie in a second, but that's kind of why I put this on the list. I also think this time around, since I moved here with my partner, it was fun watching this movie and then actually driving around, Bel Air. And I mean, I've never done any of those like star home tours, but we just, did a little bit of Googling and just drove by Lucille Ball's house or Jimmy Stewart's house. And it's sort of been fun to kind of go back in the history of Hollywood. We've been making a point to go to old restaurants that are still existing, like Dantana's and such, who are part of the fabric of the town, but also the fabric of Hollywood history. So I don't know. I'm sort of like falling back in love with LA through the movies. And this movie sort of started that because maybe this was the first movie we watched after we'd opened, everything up and set up our
Cool.
new place. So
That's awesome. Yeah, this movie, first of all, it's great to have you in LA. I think it's very nice to
likewise.
have you back, and there's a lot of things we can then start doing again too. It was fun seeing a lot of these movies together
Hmm.
that we were covering in this podcast, which was new but very fun. But
Yeah.
back to what it used to be like, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, this movie is incredible. I saw this for the first time in film school, and it was one of those movies where you see it and it's immediately like your favorite movie. Like I was just blown
Yeah.
away by how incredible this movie is, and every time I see it, it's just like still such an incredible work. It was funny this time too. It hit me for the very first time when they mentioned how, because Gloria Swanson's playing Norma Desmond, this old faded star, right, who's trying to make a comeback. And they mentioned that she's 50 in this, and I'm like, that's not that old actually. And you look really good for 50. In my mind, when I first saw this in college, oh, she's like in her 70s or in her 80s. And maybe it's because I'm not that close to 50, but I can see it coming up, around the bend a little bit. That I'm like, oh, that's actually not that old at all. I don't know why she's like having such a big deal about this. But it was awesome to come back to this movie. And like you said, I think it really captures the allure of Hollywood because it's really cool to in her house how they have her little movie theater and they're watching these silent
Hmm.
movies and talking about at that time like the good old days before sound ruined everything and there it's got this reverence for Hollywood history and then the movie was made I guess 70 years ago, so this movie's now Hollywood history obviously, but I love how
Hmm.
the movie is still being nostalgic and reflective on how important Hollywood was for Los Angeles and the film industry. So it's fun to watch a movie that is now old, sort of doing that because I enjoy doing that a lot too. The things you mentioned about going to all these places in LA that are,
Hmm.
famous filming locations or studio lots or restaurants. And I have done the Star Homes tour thing. It's really fun. It's super cheesy, but I highly recommend it. It's a fun thing to do on a weekend. But there's a lot of history here in LA, and
Yeah.
sometimes it's easy to forget that because the city is still so vibrant and changing and moving forward. LA is not a town that does a lot of reflection on the past because it's always about what are you doing next, right?
Right.
But I love thinking about that. And I think this movie, in a way, it kind of captures that really well because the town has moved past Norma Desmond. They're looking to the
Right.
future. They don't really
They don't
care
want a
that she
silent
was
star anymore.
yeah, it's like, okay, great. You were like the biggest star in the world, but like that doesn't matter at all. And that scene where she goes back to the Paramount lot and all the
It's
old guys up
amazing.
in the rafters are like, "Oh, wait, it's Norma Desmond." And people are kind of excited because they remember what she was like, but not because they want her back necessarily. I think it was like, "Oh, that's cool. Remember the days." And that's a fascinating scene. I love that scene a lot too. Especially
Yeah.
with DeMille and how he politely sort of is like, "You got to go." Like this is not your town anymore. But he's very
Yeah.
polite and genial about it.
Now, this movie has just so many layers, and every time I watch it, like you said, new things are revealed. Also, this is the genius of Billy Wilder's writing is that I almost every time forget what the plot of the movie is, like what happens.
Hmm.
It almost feels like a fresh movie every single time. And then I start to remember as I watch it, oh yeah, this happens, but then it comes with like a new bag of things that I'm unearthing for the first time. So it's just such genius in the directing and the writing of it that it just feels fresh and will always feel fresh for the history of time. But I think this time around, my big reflections were like how complicated the relationship between William Holden and Norma Desmond is.
Hmm.
Like it's not that oh, I'm just here because, I might get a job or I might make some money and you're keeping me captive here to work on this shitty screenplay that you've written. But there's also a kind of an allure that he feels for the Hollywood history part, like this mansion and all of that, but also the fact that even though these scribblings of the screenplay are probably moronic, but maybe he does feel that there's something that might be in it, that something good could come by it for him personally, but also just for storytelling, right? Because this is a town where people are always searching for, like you said, what is the next story to be told? What is the next big thing to be made? And maybe he feels that that could come by. But then there's also pity, but also kind of empathy, but maybe even attraction that he feels. Because I'd always seen this movie more from her point of view because she's such a larger than life kind of looming force. And this time around, I saw the movie a lot from his point of view that why does he stay there? He can leave easily and the movie wouldn't work, if that wasn't clear. But again, in Billy Wilder's genius writing, none of that is spelled out. There are no monologues of him saying what's on his mind. You just feel it from him, and his actions speak louder than words. So I thought that was very fascinating. And then for her, she could come off as a ghoulish character who's kind of sad and over the top. And that is true for some part of the movie, but then you start to see other layers in her too. And the scene that you mentioned when she goes back to the lot is so critical because we as an audience, we've only heard that she was a big star, but we have no idea, right? We see her watch her own silent movies. She looks attractive and very captivating and such in those movies, but we don't know. But we are then told when she goes back that everybody knows her and the impact she has. I get chills just like, people looking at her and the spotlight shining on her, that this is somebody of weight and meaning. So we as an audience really need to see that to understand why this is even a big deal and why her trauma. And then it becomes an empathetic person,
Right,
that, this is not just somebody who's crazy, lost her mind and trying to use this person and has become, so obsessed with this young guy. There's more here that's beneath the surface. So I don't know. This is a movie that the gift just keeps giving. And then, of course, the final showdown where she's completely lost it. She's being arrested and she thinks this is her
moment.
time, her moment. I'm ready for my close up. It's happening. I mean, there's nothing more tragic, but also fascinating. And then ultimately, I think Billy Wilder is making a commentary on us as an audience too, because we can't look away. It's like a train wreck accident that's happened on Sunset Boulevard that we're not helping,
Right.
but we are watching. We can't look away.
Yeah, it's like we're complicit in a way, like supporting her delusion, because everyone in this movie is, or not everyone, but like her manservant, ex-husband, even like DeMille to a certain extent, for sure, William Holden, they're keeping her in this cocoon and feeding her all these like lies and attention that she doesn't deserve necessarily, but they're doing it. I don't know. It's like, I guess they're each doing it for their own different reason, for sure, but it is to reinforce this delusion. If no one was doing this, maybe she would kill herself, like is referenced several times in
Right.
the
It's
film.
keeping her alive in a
It's
way.
keeping her alive. So they were like, well, we want to keep her alive, so we're gonna feed into this. But at the same time, they're kind of exploiting her in a way. I mean, I think William Holden is for sure. Like he was a failed
Yeah.
screenwriter, right? And now he gets to live in this luxurious life that he would have had if he was successful. He had issues with rent, right? That's how the whole movie starts. So they're trying to take his car away and he can't pay rent and his car payments. So he's getting things out. He's mooching off of
Right.
her. And that's a big thing in Hollywood too. There's a lot of, even to this day, the entourage around these people with a lot of talent. And it's all the people come out, the parasites come out to mooch off of them in different ways.
Yep.
And I think even you can say her ex-husband, manservant in this movie,
Yeah.
she left
Same
him,
thing.
right? And he's mooching off her because he can still he's still in love with her, clearly. And he can
Right.
still sort of pretend to be that protector husband. And he's getting something out of it too.
The lifestyle and money.
And the lifestyle,
Not to
exactly.
mention. But then
Exactly.
also a desire that maybe I will get to make my masterpiece. Like he switches into director mode at the very end. Like
Mhm.
that's just so complex and effed up in a way.
I
Sorry
know.
to cut you. That like he's been complicit, but now he starts to feel as if this is all normal. So yeah, it's very complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think it does capture LA and the film industry incredibly well, still
Yeah,
even to this day. And again, it's a noir, in which I love. I love a noir voiceover. I don't
same.
understand why people sometimes say voiceovers are bad and they shouldn't put them in a screenplay. Some of the best, I think, dialogue in this movie is like William Holden's voiceovers. And it starts with the classic, I bet you're wondering how I got here record scratch,
Right.
where it's like he's dead in the pool and it's like, I bet you wondered how I got here today. Like, obviously, that is utilized in every movie ever now. But every time I
Exactly.
see that, I always laugh at it just because it is such a screenwriting meme, if you will. But it's, I mean,
Yeah.
one of the ultimate ones. I am
Yeah.
wondering how you got here. It's great.
Yeah, and speaking of like the staging of the movie, every department shines. Like that shot of him floating in the pool, which is iconic, and it never gets old. It still takes my breath away. The way it's shot, obviously the music, the whole thing. I mean, her place, the every detail of that. The whole movie is mounted in such a beautiful way, but it's all in a way to serve the story and these characters. Like it doesn't feel indulgent. If this movie were made now, it'll run the risk. See Babylon.
Oh God, don't see Babylon.
The other person I want to mention is the other screenwriter, the young woman who's working with William Holden. Her character is a very important character. Betty is super important because it shows that William Holden's character could have another way. A, love in life. B, a screenwriting partner who seems to be really good and wants to go places and is ambitious, and they could become a team. But it shows you the psychology of people, but also psychology of this town, that you're so trapped in your own demons. In case of William Holden, where he feels like he knows that some part of his brain that I should leave Norma and just go do this and be with this girl who he clearly likes and she likes him back, but he can't, he's in his own way. Like a lot of us, but especially in this town where you feel like maybe that's a harder road. Maybe it'll be easier to just stay with Norma and maybe something comes out of this, or maybe I'll just mooch off of her riches, or maybe I'm attracted to her, or maybe you don't know anything about his backstory, what he kind of relationship he had with his parents or his mom. Right. So there's maybe that at play here. Who knows? But that character is so important to show what it could be. Otherwise, the audience would be like, why wouldn't you leave? And that tension makes it a lot more interesting and engaging, I think.
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's the classic, like, do you choose love or career or love or success? And I think he knows deep down that he's always going to chase after career or success or money. And
But that's
love
the
is not going
sad
to be important
part.
to him.
He could get career with Betty too, because she's a screenwriter, but he doesn't sort of see that fully. He
Yeah,
wants the easier path of just
easy.
mooching off of this person.
Yeah, he found a
That's why if it
shortcut.
were just love, like this was some random person he met in, I don't know, a cafeteria, it will be different. This is not just love, it could be more. And yet he doesn't take it, which makes it even more interesting, I think.
Yeah, he doesn't have to try. He already has that with Norm, and that in terms of the
True.
success that comes, not the notoriety, or maybe the screenplay he's writing is never going to get produced, but he has all the positives that come along with a successful career, a giant house, never have to worry about all these
Right.
things. He's like, hey, look, I found the short path to where I want to get at. I don't even have to actually try to be a screenwriter anymore because maybe that doesn't really matter to me either. It was just about this goal of a lifestyle is maybe what he
Right.
was chasing this whole time. And I think you're right. He knows that deep down inside. So I do love that scene too when he basically has to tell Betty, like, no, go off and marry this guy. I'm not the right guy for you, kind of thing. Because it is very revealing on what kind of person this guy is, like who William Holden's character is, which is not, yeah, he's a screwed up guy, not a good guy, but I love that her reaction and his reaction too. Like he doesn't want to say this to her, but he sort of knows it's the right thing to do because he already found his
Yeah.
ticket and he's like, look, you want a happy life, you have this guy that just go off and be with him in Arizona.
Which is another noir thing, right? Like, I mean, other than Betty, I mean, we don't know much about her, but like these two people and everybody else that we mentioned, they're not good people.
No,
These are people who use each other. They have very low self-esteem. They're parasitic in some way or the other. I mean, Norma is the biggest parasite because she's feeding off her own self, her
right.
own grandeur. It's a very tragic and sad, but also self-eating kind of character. So these are not good people. None of them are. And you could argue they're fractions of the system of Hollywood that they've been put in this place. But I think, yeah, that's true. But I think they are also not helping their own causes by the choices that they're making themselves and the character they inhabit. And that's what makes it more interesting. Because if it were just system outputs and victims, then that would get boring. And also, it would not be true to life. Because in my mind, it's always both of those things at play.
It's like
It's
people are attracted to certain types of careers and certain places. And yes, the systems and Hollywood and how it treats its creatives, especially, is tough and can bring out
yeah.
certain bad sides of you too. But certain people just get attracted to that
Yeah, it's also who
lifestyle or
you
way.
are.
That's just
Yeah.
exactly just who you are. And I think this movie does a fantastic job of the more like darker and tragic and alluring sides of Hollywood and sort of what comes along with that. And then, to a greater extent, Los Angeles, you could also throw in there
Right.
too, because this is definitely a company town. Reminds me a lot of the episode we did on movies that shaped our view of LA. This definitely was
Right.
a big missing piece, I think, for both of us, because I easily could have put this on my
Oh yeah.
list too, even back then. So it's great that we're able to talk about it. Especially great to be able to talk about because you are in LA now. Again,
Exactly.
it's great having you
Yeah,
here.
it added more texture to, watching this movie, being in LA and kind of thinking about these people driving around. So yeah, I mean, this is a banger. Always will be. All right. So that was my number three. What's your number three that shaped your 2024?
So my number three is another location-based film. It is Miami Vice from 2006. This is a movie directed by Michael Mann, starring Colin Farrell, Jamie Foxx, and Gong Li. The plot summary: based on the 1980s TV action drama, this update focuses on Vice detectives Crockett and Tubbs as their respective personal and professional lives become dangerously intertwined. So there was an episode we did last year, I believe, or last season, on movies that shaped our like travel wish list, places we want to
Mhm.
go. And listeners might remember I had Bad Boys, the Michael Bay film on there about Miami, a place I'd always wanted to go. And this year I actually went to Miami. And it lived up to my expectations. And actually, I think this movie, in a way, encapsulates Miami more to me now than Bad Boys was sort of the I want to go to Miami, and now I've been, and I think this is more the Miami movie to me now, which is pretty cool. So I'll put the link in the comments down below so you guys can go back and re-listen to that episode if you want to. But another reason why I wanted this film on my list, well, first of all, I think it is the movie I've saw the most times this year, which is interesting going back and looking at that twice
Mm.
in theaters, and then once preparing for this episode, and then once on New Year's last year. But folks that are on film Twitter, this movie kind of had a moment. Pop culture critic posted on Twitter, basically like, I'm about to show my girlfriend my favorite movie. This is like the most important step in our relationship, like no going back. Here it is. And he posted the intro to Miami Vice, and it started this whole big diatribe online. Like I don't participate in film Twitter, but I love following it. And it was definitely cool to see a movie that is from 20 years ago, almost now, kind of have a big cultural zeitgeist moment again, to the point
Mm.
where there's a theater in LA where 4 days after this tweet went out and caused this firestorm online, they actually had a screening. They're like, we're going to show a Miami Vice because it's kind of becoming really hot online. So I went and saw that in the theater, which is the first time I've seen the movie since 2006. And then about a month later, they actually had a screening at the Egyptian Theater hosted
Mm.
by a Miami Vice podcast. There's a podcast where all they do is talk about this movie, which maybe this podcast might turn into here, but where they brought in actually the guy from New York. They flew him in to talk about like, yeah, I'm the guy who like started this whole thing, which was pretty
Oh
funny to see
wow.
that. And then they had Michael Mann had made a surprise appearance and did a
Oh my
Q&A
gosh.
afterwards too, which was freaking amazing. So that is why to me like this movie is will always be associated to me with 2004, and maybe again for a lot of other people who got sucked into the Twitter discourse on it. Also, this is one of my favorite movies. I was not a big fan of it when it first came out. I thought it was okay, but I watch this movie multiple times every year, and I just there's something about it I absolutely love. And I'll talk more about the film in a sec, but want to get your thoughts on Miami Vice. Were you following the Twitter discourse that was going on at the time or not?
No, I missed this, but I do know that you saw it, and I do know that it was playing in theaters. And I was wondering that what started this, and I was like, oh, maybe because Man made a movie last year, or that's where my head was going. So I had no clue that all this drama was unfolding. So that's fun to hear. But yeah, I never watched this movie before. I think we've talked about that,
Hmm.
off mic and maybe even on the podcast. So it was fun to watch it for the first time. And yeah, I guess I'm sort of in maybe the same camp as you, which is probably a lot of people when they first come to this movie, which is that technically it looks brilliant. The locations are amazing. I mean, this is obviously a Michael Mann movie, so it looks incredible. Like, I don't think I've seen Miami shown this way and every other location in the movie shown this way. You just want to be there. It's just so seductive in that sense. But I feel like I need to watch it a few more times to kind of really fully understand it. There's so much going on in the movie and you're thrown right into it, which is, I think, the point that you're supposed to kind of just be in this roller coaster ride with these people. But it's classic Man, right? Like, you're dispersed between set pieces and car chases and grand sequences with then men talking about their fading masculinities and their doubts and nihilisms and all of that, right? So that's very, very much Man. But I think it takes a little bit to kind of get into the tempo of that, unlike some of the other man movies that we've covered on this podcast, which kind of grab you right away. This is a bit of a harder thing. So yeah, I'm curious to hear, like, from the first time you watched it to where you stand now, like what was it that sort of hooked you into it, you know?
Yeah, I definitely agree with the assessment on the film that in a way, like Michael Mann has always been a man who, no pun intended, who is focused on, there's a lot of visual style and a lot of
Yeah.
mood. And what comes along with that too is also plot and character and things like that. But it's definitely he focuses a lot on that visual style and vibe, basically. And this is, I think, the
Hmm.
pinnacle of that, where it is
Yeah.
is more so that than anything else. And definitely the first time I saw the film, much like you, I couldn't really follow the plot. I wasn't really sure what was going on, what I was supposed to be following, and that was because I was going to the movie looking for plot. And I think this movie, what opened it up for me was now I understand the plot because I've seen it maybe like 2 dozen times, but it's putting that piece aside and just kind of getting into the mood and just feeling what this movie feels like. I think, first of all, in terms of the Miami piece, Miami looks beautiful in it. This is one of the beginnings of his movies where he would shoot everything on HD. So much like
Right.
Collateral too. And I think
Hmm.
the HD cameras they were using just really captures the glow of cities at night. And that's why Collateral, I
Totally.
think, captures LA so well that no other movie really has. And Miami, after having been there, it is similar in LA of like there's just glow that the city has where it comes
Mm.
alive at night and turns into something different. And the HD cameras, especially in the opening scenes when on the rooftops, talking about this
Yeah.
guy who's basically been found out that he was a
It
snitch,
glows.
and
Yeah.
just it's just incredible. You can see there's sharpness. You can see way into the distance too, which is
Yeah.
something also in Miami you can kind of see very far. And there's also this sense of you kind of feel the humidity in the air. There was a hurricane going on when they were shooting this. It was a
Right.
total disaster shoot, but
Right.
it adds like this electricity into the things that are going on. Sometimes you'd see lightning back in the background just because that was what was happening. These really cool breezes. There's a scene at the end when he's saying goodbye to Gong Li. I can feel the humidity and the warm
Hmm.
breeze in the air that come from these tropical cities, and you can see his beautiful hair getting blown back in the wind,
Hmm.
and so definitely he captures, I think, the feeling of Miami, the city of Miami, in that way. But in terms of the film, I think this really is again, like you said, kind of classic man themes, but it's very meditative on this whole concept, which he's used in several of his films before, about time is luck. It's a line that is quoted by Gong Li in this film. It was also a line used in Heat and also in Manhunter. And in those two movies, time is luck was supposed to mean like, why are you wasting your time pursuing this criminal case? Or why don't you slow down and focus on your family because we don't have a lot of time? Women would be saying it to men in each one of these movies. And in this movie, also, a woman says it to a man, but it is about a relationship and that sometimes you meet someone and it's not going to last. And every single moment you have with this person is that luck that time is giving you, right? To me, that's what this movie reframes that Michael Mann theme into being one about this romance. And to me now, it's what the romance of this movie, which I didn't really jive with the first time I saw it, to be honest. That is what to me sucks me in. Like Colin Farrell and Gong Li's relationship in this movie is electric, amazing, and now watching sort of it evolve because you know where it's going now. The way that he captures these looks that they're making each other, you can see there's like this instant attraction. What do they do with it? Because Colin Farrell's character is undercover, and Gong Li is one of the kingpins in this drug organization he's trying to infiltrate, but she doesn't know that. So it's like similar to in a relationship when something starts, people you do put on a little bit of a mask and don't really reveal yourselves in the beginning as you play this kind of like flirtatious dance, and that's what happens to them. And then at the end of the movie, again, like the luck runs out, like Colin Farrell says to her, and I just love that scene in the beach at the end when they're sort of
Hmm.
reflecting back on this thing that was they knew was never going to go anywhere because of circumstances beyond their own control, which is a lot of the case too with relationships that you fall in that are short lived. It's not anyone's fault necessarily. It's over, and you have to be happy with the time that you had, and that's why time is luck. So it's really the romance in this movie now, beyond all the vibes, that
Hmm.
just draws me in. I just love the relationship between them and seeing them kind of flirt and go back and forth. And it's yeah, that to me is what stands out. But like you said, first time I was like, I don't get this. I don't
Yeah.
feel this. It felt very empty to me, this movie, and when I saw it in theaters in 2006.
Yeah.
But now it's all the cup is overflowing in a way now for me. It's like there's so much in this movie that I love it. I absolutely love
Yeah.
this film.
I could see that. I mean, I didn't find it to be empty. I could see that there's more beneath the surface. it just felt that I need to engage with it more and
Hmm.
kind of put in the work and kind of excavate and meet it where it's at. But I could tell that there's more just going on. Also, I think just dialogues and such, like you can't sort of decipher very clearly what people are saying, so it takes a little bit to kind of get into that too. In a weird way, we've been covering, I mean, we just covered Gladiator and Ridley Scott. It reminded me of a little bit of a late period Ridley Scott movie in some ways too, just because of the unevenness of the acting in this movie. Like, I think Jamie Foxx is in a slightly different movie than Colin Farrell. And maybe I say this because I know that Colin Farrell doesn't even remember making the movie. So there's, some of that at play versus Jamie Foxx, like really keyed in and sort of doing all the expressions and everything. But maybe that's the point. And so there are these sort of oddities, I think, which maybe when you watch the movie more times, it starts to kind of blend in and just feel more seamless and purposeful, versus now it sort of felt a little uneven to me in that way.
Yeah, the Jamie Foxx stuff is interesting, and this is a controversial take, I think, among fans of this movie. But I do really prefer the director's cut version of this.
Mm,
And one of the things that adds is more scenes with Jamie Foxx and his girlfriend, and you sort of
mm,
the movie is more of a two lead film in its
mm,
director's cut version, where you see what Jamie Foxx's character is wrestling with, which again is the cost of going undercover and leaving this double life when it goes back on his home life. Colin Farrell doesn't have a
right.
home life. You don't really know kind of what's going on with him other than there's something missing in his life,
Yeah, he
which is
feels
a
very empty.
relationship. Right, he's very empty. But Jamie Foxx, it gives him more to do. This also might be a little controversial. So the movie has one of the most famous openings of all time because, like you
Yeah,
said, it drops you right in. You see the Universal logo, and then it's boom. You're into a Jay
yeah.
song. You're in the club. Stuff's happening. They're in the middle of this case. You don't know anything that's going on. And the director's cut starts with a boat chase that's like a setup to the sting operation they're about to do at the club. And it just, to me, it's like a little slower. The music starts. It's a brilliant shot where the camera's like under the water as it sort of
Mm,
lifts up, sort of like this undercover underworld, and then revealing the truth above kind of metaphor, I
mm,
think. It gets you into the vibe of it a little bit more. And even though it is
mm,
cool that you drop you right in the middle of the action, I sort of like getting lulled into the world and like the harmony of what this movie operates on. It's very hard to grok, I think, otherwise. But the Jamie Foxx thing, I think his performance and his character works a lot better when there's just more to do. Again, there's a lot of on-set problems where he got mad because there was a gun that showed up on set and he left and refused to go back to where they were. There's all this back and forth stuff
right.
behind the scenes. Did affect the third act of the film, was used to be completely different. But yeah, I think Colin Farrell, despite him unfortunately being under a lot of drugs and alcohol, where he went right into rehab after this film.
Right.
I think this is one of my favorite performances of his in terms of just this guy who is so empty and he finds this something in with his relationship with Gong Li, and there's definitely something there, and they even start kind of bonding and kind of revealing themselves. He tells his back history, which I assume is real, when he's talking to her in Havana about where his
Right.
what his father came from. It could be his cover story, or that actually could be his real background. You don't really know that. What I like that, and then he has to throw it all away and go right back into the job because it is just a job. Maybe that's all that he has. And another thing I just love about this movie too is just the ending, where
Mm,
it just ends.
yeah.
There's really
There's
no
no
resolution
explanation.
too much. You don't really know what's going on with Jamie Foxx's wife, and Colin Farrell just walks into the hospital. He leaves Gong Li, and then life goes on. Which again is, I think, in terms of the romance, just another theme of there's a breakup for whatever particular reason, and you're never going to see this person again in your entire life. And okay, life goes on. I'm just going to pick up, move forward, and keep going. I mean, that the scene too on the beach, he walks away and then she's leaving on the boat. And then he kind of turns around one more time just to be like, this is it. This is the last time I think I'm ever going to see her. And just, again, Colin Farrell's acting in this stuff to me just hits so hard. And I don't know if a man has ever looked hotter in a movie ever than Colin Farrell in this movie. It's just something about his haircut, his like that crazy mustache, the sort of his demeanor, the way he does his American accent in this movie. The pinnacle of male attractiveness, hotness, sexiness, whatever you want to say, just unbelievable. Like if I just get wowed by what he does in this movie every time.
You
Insane.
have been farrelled, it
Oh,
seems
absolutely.
like.
He
You
is
are
he is
feral for feral. I'm just gonna keep going on with these.
yeah. Yeah, I just love his performance in this. Just something else. I don't know. And unfortunately, it might have been maybe the drugs and alcohol. And obviously, I'm happy that he's doing much better now. and in
Yeah,
his career and also in his personal life too. But for me, this is always the purest distillation of why Colin Farrell is who he is.
I cannot top that. No, I definitely look forward to checking out this movie more times. I was not aware of the rest of the cast of the movie because I've only just known that these two guys were in it. But it was
Mhm.
fun to see John Hawkes and Naomi Harris, who plays Jamie Foxx's wife. Like, she's such an amazing actress, and we've seen her in lots of things, Moonlight, Oscar nominated and such. So I was like, oh, you're in this too, and she looks amazing, and kind of you get her personality and her character like right away really inhabits it. Gong Li, who I'd never heard of before, like, she's amazing. So as usual, like, man movies, even though they can be vibe movies and more about set pieces and visuals, the actors, other than one person who we have covered in the movie Black Hat.
Yeah, I know you didn't like Hemsworth in the man
Yeah,
sphere, but no,
goodness.
I agree.
But
The cast
everybody
is
else, always brings it because they know
right.
they're in a man movie and they know they have to kind of do the work.
Yeah, the cast is really deep in this, and even some
Yeah.
great character actors that barely have any screen time. But what I love
Yeah.
about that is that you recognize these people. So there's amazing shots where they'll just be, Colin Farrell doing his thing with the criminals in the foreground, and the background you'll see every so often one of the other guys just sort of being there. So it's like they're,
Mm.
even though Colin Farrell and Jamie Foxx are undercover, the rest of the team is still there, just making sure everything's okay, and they're sort of blended in the background. But every so often, man, like puts them in focus for a couple seconds, and it's like, oh, okay, cool. They're there in the background too, like doing something. And if these weren't actors that you would recognize, even if you don't know their names, it sort of helps having that little bit of
Yeah.
recognition. And yeah, and then just on Gong Li too, she did not know English when she made this movie and learned all the lines like phonetically, which I think is just
Mm.
incredible that she's able to pull it off. And she's an actress that I always liked, and she's a Chinese actress that I've seen a lot of
Hmm.
her films before this movie. And actually, the first time I saw the movie, she didn't really work for me. I think because a lot of that. And then it's not until like seeing the movie for so many times as I have, I can really see it's not really in the dialogue with her at all. Because again, it's not her first language. She didn't even know English. But it's in these very subtle, facial movements and body language. It's a big body language movie, I feel like, because
Right.
when you are undercover, you can't say things, especially with this romance sort of being a little bit of a forbidden thing, even in the context of her getting with one of the other guys involved in the crime ring. Like that is,
Right.
that's illicit in of itself.
A
Not
whole
alone
other
that,
thing. Yeah.
no one knows he's a cop, but even what she's doing is bad. So like the body language between the two of them, I think that's where Gong Li's performance really shines a lot for me. Again, the more times you see it, this is definitely a movie that I do recommend people watch more than once. I mean, maybe after two times and it still doesn't hit with you, it's like, okay, like you don't need to keep trying. But when I first saw it, there was something there that I just, even though I
Yeah, I
left
see
feeling
it.
empty, it's like,
Yeah.
okay, and it just maybe it's just I've lulled myself into submission in terms of the amount of times that I've seen it. But it again, going back to just this year, captures Miami, and I'd love to be part of this Twitter discourse. I mean, clearly there is something in here. I mean, the guy who started this whole thing said this is his favorite movie of all time.
Mm.
And that's what started the, oh my God, I can't believe you like this movie better than Heat or The Insider. And then how do you like this movie at all? And it got into this whole big thing. And apparently his girlfriend did like it. So, and they're still
That's good. I
together
was curious about
from what I
that.
gather,
Yeah.
which is good. Oh,
Time is luck thing is also kind of timely. It always is timely. So, kind of thinking about that as you were saying, and I felt that even in the movie too, is that, yeah, we have limited time here. You got to make the most of it. That thing comes to life, but also there are other deeper meanings to that too, which I think was prescient in this year too, with all the stuff going on in the world, which is
hmm.
always the case. It's kind of an
Yeah,
evergreen, thematically evergreen movie in that sense, because I think that theme will always be true.
that's right. Yeah, we're only here for a limited amount of time. So at any
Yeah.
time you get, you just have to be lucky that you
Yeah.
have it because you never know when it's
Yeah.
out. I agree. Yeah. And maybe as a New Year's kind of reflection thing too. That's actually why I watched the
Hmm.
movie. The first time I watched it this year was right after New Year's because it sort
Mm.
of it felt like a kind of New Year's thing for me. And then again, the three subsequent times. Okay, so what is your number two movie that shaped your 2024?
Gosh, this can't be a bigger left turn from where we just were. But my number two is Perfect Days from 2023, directed and written by Wim Wenders and Takuma Takasaki, starring Koji Yakusho, Tokio Imoto, and Arisa Nakano. Quick logline: Hirayama cleans public toilets in Tokyo, lives life in simplicity and daily tranquility. Some encounters also lead him to reflect on himself. This is a weird tagline, but it does it. This is the movie.
It's a movie. Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, This is a Japanese movie. I think in one of our older episodes of films that shaped our love of movies, I brought a Wim Wenders movie to that.
Wings of
Berlin,
Desire.
Wings of Desire,
Mhm.
exactly. Obviously, I'm a big fan of that and big fan of Paris, Texas. So when this movie was announced, I was very curious about it, but I just didn't have the time to watch it all of last year. Also kind of came at the end of last year. And like I mentioned earlier, I was, moving to LA and such. So it just sort of kind of escaped me. And then I
Mhm.
finally watched it a few months ago and was kind of blown away just by the simplicity of the movie. I'll get into the movie a little bit later, but the reason why I put it on the list was, I came here for a new job, and work is such a critical part of who we are, especially in this country, right? Like our lives revolve around work, and there's so much that comes with it, like joy and success and feeling of accomplishment, but also all the other stuff that doesn't work out, and so easy to sort of complain about it, or drive yourself in the ground, or drive other people in the ground, or point fingers at whoever, right, of why things are the way they are. And it was something about watching this movie this year in the headspace that I was, just wrestling with some of these themes in my own life, and just being hit by the simplicity and joy that this guy feels in doing work that we most of us would think is menial work, probably even below a lot of people, but just gets so much of joy doing that. And it's not like, oh, I'm just going to do this job to pay for the bills so I can then go and stare at the trees and take their photos, or read my book, or just have peace and quiet in my life. No, he actually does like the work he does. He starts every day with a smile. He has his routine. He has his cassettes that he puts in his car, and he feels a sense of purpose, and he helps the people. He feels like he's contributing to society by cleaning toilets, and just, being a part of the fabric of society. He's living life, but he's also not defined by this job. He has other passions in his life, and I'll speak more on the movie, but it just hit me very hard just looking at this guy's life and just his face, how Wim Wenders' camera captures his face. It's just so moving, and there's so much depth and joy to that. So, yeah, that's why this is my number two.
Yeah, I had not seen the movie before
Mm.
this podcast, and I really enjoyed it. I thought, like you said, captures, I think, I want to say work-life balance here, but I think this guy does have some big things missing from his personal life. He
Oh,
does
yeah.
seem very lonely and disconnected,
Yeah.
but he is, like you said, he has a job that is menial, that he still finds joy in it. It's not necessarily even like pride of his work or anything. He just enjoys the actual work itself of cleaning these toilets. And I love the morning routines that they show of him, like getting ready, getting this, getting the keys, and getting the cleaners, and having everything organized in
Hmm.
his van. And the way he goes about like cleaning these toilets is very like methodical, and he has his little systems, and but he's happy doing it. It's something that
Hmm.
gives him happiness, because also it helps other people. Like I love his interactions with the various customers at different times that come in to use the restroom, or the scene where he finds the little boy who's lost from his mom and trying to help him out.
Right.
So he's definitely kind of woven into the fabric of what the life is like in this Tokyo suburb, instead of seen as just a menial worker who's not part of society. He's just like a faceless kind of maid who's supposed to do these things. So I thought that was really nice, and just a good outlook on when you have a job that does give you joy, no matter what it is. It doesn't need to be something that I think everyone would say, "Oh, I'd love to do this." Like, hey, some people like doing jobs like this. I mean, honestly, when this podcasting endeavor of ours, when we retire off the riches of this, I would love to honestly do the exact same job this guy's doing. It's been a dream of mine just to clean bathrooms. I was like, this actually looks really great. I'd love a job like this. It would give me the happiness, I think, that
Yeah.
not that I don't enjoy our podcasting careers. That's very good too. You got to pay the bills. But no, I was like, oh, this looks great. And I think it also is just a reminder too of, a lot of people say things like, oh, if we had a society where no one had to work and there was no labor market and people just got to do what they wanted, who would clean the sewers, and who would, be the people who clean the bathrooms? Some people like it. You can
Right.
tell he's doing it, like you said, not for the money because he has some rich other life, that he has a hobby that it's very expensive or whatever. No, it's just he enjoys the simplicity of it. And I thought that was refreshing, and really just joyous to watch, actually, seeing someone who
Totally.
just enjoys what he does. It's great.
Totally. And then the joy that he gets from there and brings it to the rest of his life too. And yes, there's a lot of loneliness there, but I wouldn't classify him as a loner either, because the interactions he had, like, when he goes to a restaurant, when he goes to the bookstore, he is connected, but he's just not overly in it. And then his passions for music and reading and photography. That's the other thing, I just drew so much empathy for just humanity watching this movie. You're sitting, I don't know, in a subway, or you're in line for coffee, and you see somebody, and it's so easy to just assume in a second what their lives are. If they look a certain way, or if they dress a certain way, we have no idea what their passions are and what else they do. And it's easy to sort of think about people, I think, in a more negative light. And I try to kind of uphold the mantra of, like, no matter what side you think you might be, ultimately we are all humans. What connects us is kindness, I think. And this was just another reminder of that. You have to look at people in a whole way, not just what they posted one day, or the fight they had one day, or the thing they got agitated by. It's everything else in between. And I think this guy kind of really lives that, upholds that. Like, it's life between the lines that actually is where the joy is. So that's beautiful. I thought.
I agree. And it was a reminder to me too that joy is different for every person. Because honestly, I
Yeah.
was about halfway through this movie. I'm like, damn, this guy is just a lonely, sad man who has nothing outside of just this job he has. He has no family or friends. He doesn't talk much. And then by the end of the movie, I'm like, well, but he's happy doing this. Just because that's
Yeah.
what make me happy. Like I want to be surrounded by friends and family and have connection, but some people don't. And I'm not. I then sort of like pulled back my judgment on this guy's life and been like, hey, look, he seems to love. He has solo passions. He likes reading and photography that he's just by himself. And he when he interacts with people, he has great interaction. The scene where he's helping
Hmm.
the guy who's dying of cancer, and they're playing those little games. So it's not like he's
Right.
has social anxiety disorder at all. He just is
No.
someone who doesn't need to have that constant interaction with other people. And at the end of the movie, I'm like, I'm happy for this guy because for a while and about halfway through, I'm like, this is where's his family? And then you sort of learn he has problems with the family. Like, oh, geez, like maybe this movie is just a sad movie about this lonely guy. And then by the end, I'm like, no, actually, he's happy, he's sad, he's everything, right? But this is not. I don't have to take pity
Exactly.
on him. Is sort of where my evolution
No.
of with this character, like during the 2 hours of the film, I changed my opinion, and towards the end, which maybe I'm sure we'll talk about the final scene.
Oh my
It was just
gosh.
like so powerful. I'm like, wow, like this is it. Everything is tied up in this one shot.
I mean, what a masterclass in acting and movie making. There are no big monologues, there are no explosions, there's nothing. And we can just get into it. It's just the camera on his face. And it's all of those things, like you mentioned. There's peace and resolve, but there's also loneliness. There is also desire for this woman that at the restaurant that I think he feels something for, but
Right.
now he's discovered that she had an ex who's dying, and maybe that's made him think about his mortality. There's a niece character who shows up and stays with him, and clearly he has such a avuncular kind of love towards her. And even that girl is so sweet and nice and has no judgment towards the work he does, wants to help out and just be
Yeah.
there and join
Yeah.
him. And even though he's like, oh, maybe you shouldn't come and you'll get bored or whatever. And maybe he feels that she will judge, but no, there isn't. But then there's complications with his sister and
His
their
father.
parents and his
Yeah.
father and what happened
Hmm.
there. So yeah, maybe it's a choice he made to kind of walk away from all of that, but that doesn't mean you don't miss it. And that's what the final shot captured, just all of those things of what life could be. But I'm also happy, but also not fully there. But you got to keep going. You got to keep driving. You
Right.
listen to that music, and you also have to show up for life. He makes a choice every morning that when he leaves, it's like crack of dawn. He puts a smile on his face.
I love that. Yeah.
I love that. It's a
He
choice,
it is a
and
choice. Yeah.
yeah, and it's another such a beautiful thing. Like, yeah, we can show up, and my partner often reminds me of this. Like when I'm like wound up on something, he just says, Karan, just smile. And I do that. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay, this is not worth me stressing about actually at all.
Exactly.
It's a choice you can make. And especially the world that we live in, people are up in arms about all sorts of stuff that they hate or dislike. And I think it's easier to hate and rebel. I'm not saying, give in, no, stand for what you stand for,
Hmm.
but also show up with a smile and be kind and good, you know? Otherwise, you are doing the same as the people you are unhappy with.
Or you're just
Doesn't,
unhappy. Like
or you're just unhappy.
you're not spreading happy. I mean, I think the
Right.
more people that are happy, the more other people get happy, and it's like a virus in a positive way. So if
Right.
you're sort of showing up negative and being frustrated all the time, that's not spreading joy to anybody else, and you might actually then be spreading frustrations too. And I think this
Yeah.
movie does. I think this character especially in all of his interactions outside of himself, basically with other people, it's all from kindness, and even his annoying, you might say, coworker who's this young kid who doesn't
Yeah.
care and gives no, and he's trying to like sell his tapes and
Oh,
stuff and is
no.
wondering about his girlfriend, blah blah blah, this or that. He could easily be like, you know what, get out, like you suck, like don't talk to me. But he doesn't, and he gives him that money at the end to help him out on his date. I like that part too. He's like, here, just
Yeah.
take some money, even though he's not rich at all, the main character in any way.
No.
But he is just nice to everyone because why not? Like it's free. Being nice is free, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I look forward to watching this again. Also, I think we are covering a lot of place movies on our list. So this is another place movie. You know, it's not showing you the obvious Tokyo stuff that you've probably seen in Lost in Translation or other, not that Lost in Translation is obvious, it's like an amazing movie,
Right, right, right.
but this movie kind of shows other sides of Tokyo from his point of view. A lot of it is seen from a car or his van. I
Hmm.
love that too. You know, it's something I mostly drive, but when I'm not driving, I love doing that. I'm usually not on my phone. I just look out and look up and down, just kind of observing the city wherever I'm at. So it was fun to just, be on next to him, sitting in the van, just looking
Yeah.
at Tokyo. I enjoyed that quite a bit.
Yeah, that I thought it was really cool slice of what Tokyo is like through this guy's lens. It was also interesting just in terms of the genesis of this movie. I went down a huge several Wikipedia rabbit holes, but in the short of it is this was essentially going to be an advertisement that the company who created these toilets wanted to have
Which are
some.
amazing, by the way.
Yeah, I mean they look incredible. I mean I've never
Yeah.
been to Tokyo, so I haven't experienced them
Yeah. I
firsthand.
have some of them and they're amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just incredible. And they built these and wanted someone to shoot an ad for it, and it evolved into this movie, which is just such a sort of bizarre in a way, like evolution of what this thing was, which is essentially supposed to just be a commercial work to promote the toilets because it was the 2020 Olympics, and it turned into this. I mean, that is just crazy to me to think
Amazing.
about, like where this thing started. It wasn't something where Vin Vendor's like, oh, I want to write this story. No, it's like,
Right.
okay, this company's like promote our toilets, and then this is what he delivers. Is just so cool to think. It makes the movie cooler to me somehow. It's like
Yeah.
that's where this started. Like talk about getting the assignment and like over delivering because he was supposed to shoot like a commercial or a short film. It's like no, let's actually make this really touching story about humanity and stuff, and not just saying how cool these toilets are to make this company feel better for the Olympics. Just crazy.
That's amazing. I think I did know that, but I've forgotten about it. So that's a good reminder. Speaking of Wim Wenders, I really think maybe people don't agree with me on this, which is fine, but there's a lot of discourse, right? Who is allowed to tell whose story? And there might be people like, oh, this movie is made by a German person who's not a Japanese. And what do they know about our culture and what have you? But I don't know. I sort of think that as long as you're being truthful to your experience and you're trying to kind of show that, anybody should be able to make any story and tell it. Because it's, first of all, there's no cap on the stories that people, we are humans. This is what we were born to do, to tell
Right.
stories. And
Hmm.
it's actually interesting to see stories from different points of view, especially told by somebody who's not from there, but clearly somebody who has spent a lot of time there and has some appreciation and understanding for the place, but more importantly, understanding for humanity, which is
Right.
universal anyway.
Exactly.
This story could take place anyway. I love that. I remember when this movie came out, there's little of that coming up because
Hmm.
obviously the media loves this, right? This is another
Right.
clickbait item
Yep.
that, oh,
Yep.
why are you making this movie? And I remembered that and I watched the movie and I was like, what are you talking about? I'm so glad and grateful that this movie exists. And so yeah, Wim Wenders is amazing. Please keep making movies.
The only films I've seen of his are the two we have on this podcast. I enjoyed both of them, but I just want to second everything you just said. I'm 100% in agreement on that. It's like humans are humans, and humans tell stories about other humans. And this movie didn't isn't about Japan. It's about humanity
Right.
and getting wound up about those sort of things, especially when the movie's good. is like,
Right.
what's the point of this? It's that going back to the negativity thing you mentioned earlier.
Right.
Like, why are you mentioning this again? Like, what's the point of attacking a film because of who made it? Like, okay, if
Yeah.
it's great, it is. So shouldn't we just be happy that the movie exists instead of trying to
Right.
tear it down in different ways?
Exactly. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. This is one of those movies like make yourself a nice tea or coffee on a Saturday afternoon and just, get comfortable and get like a nice cozy blanket and watch this.
Agreed. Yeah, it's a small but impactful film. Like it's small, there's
Impactful
not a lot
film.
that really happens from like a plot standpoint, but it definitely overwhelms you and just takes you makes you think about a lot of things, make you feel about a lot of things. I really enjoyed it. I'd been wanting to see it and then it like you when it first came
Hmm.
out, it's tough to see everything, especially end of year trying to scramble, so I just kind of fell
Especially
off
last
my
year was we
yeah.
had embarrassment of riches.
Yeah,
Uh,
we definitely did. So I'm
yeah.
glad that you put this on the list so I could watch it this week. It's a sort of like a little New Year's kind of thing too. I think it's the
Yeah.
reflectiveness on it too sort of is I think
Yeah.
good this
True.
time of year to kind of think back on what simple joys that you have in your life and focus on those, you know?
Right. Right. And how do you show up and how do you treat people, like
Right.
you've been talking? I also want to say the movie is very cinematic, right? Like this movie, this kind of movie can be sometimes kind of boxed in, or human stories can feel very visually not striking, or any of those things that, cinematographers and people who care more about that sort of stuff can be up in arms about. But I just want to call out that this is a very cinematic portrayal of a human story and this city, but it's not overindulgent either. It's in service of this person, the story that they're telling, but you do feel like this is not a TV movie.
No, that's a really good point, actually, that I was surprised by, to be honest, because from the
Yeah.
trailers, and it is a very simple movie that is just
Yeah.
about a person existing, and you could tell it visually in a very simple way. Even though he boxes it in literally by the fact that it's a 4:3 aspect ratio, which I thought was an
True.
interesting choice. I guess a kind of throwback to Ozu films that I think he's
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
reference here, but. It is very cinematic and beautiful cinematography, great use of color in this film. I think you're exactly right. Like he's taking this simple story and it could have been told in a simple way, but instead he just can't help himself with how beautiful this movie is and just makes Tokyo so beautiful too.
Exactly. And it sort of elevates the movie. It envelopes you, engulfs you because of that. And of course, the music, the choice of all the 70s tracks that he puts in his
Yeah.
cassettes, it's all very purposeful. I kept listening to the Perfect Day song days after I watched this movie because it just sort of takes over you. So
Yeah.
yeah, great use of all the different mise-en-scène elements in the movie as well. All right. What is your next?
So my number two movie that shaped my 2024 is Bulworth from 1998. This is a movie directed, written, and starring Warren Beatty, along with Halle Berry. And the IMDb plot summary: a suicidally delusioned liberal politician puts a contract out on himself and takes the opportunity to be bluntly honest with his voters by affecting the rhymes and speech of hip hop and culture. So this is a movie from 20 years ago. It's 1998, like I mentioned. And the reason why I brought this into the podcast and this year and why I come back to this movie every so often is especially in election years. And this is a big election here in the United States for president. This is a movie about elections. And, as someone who has a lot of political opinions and, is a follows politics and political movements in the United States and around the world. This year was taken up a lot from my time and discourse around the election itself, the presidential election here in the United States. I have a lot of friends of mine that are also very interested in politics. So most of if you go back over my text messages over the past year, probably like 80% of them are all like back and forth political debates having on text messages, sharing articles. I spent a lot of time reading this year with a lot of the journalists and things that I follow, just about, again, especially in the United States, just political election news and analysis. And from a year that, at the outset, it looked like it was going to be an incredibly boring election with, rematch between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, turned into one of the more exciting elections that I've seen in a very long time. Two attempted assassinations, switch out at the last
Uh-huh.
minute of candidates. It just was totally a whirlwind. And then to a result that was surprising, but not surprising at the same time in terms of the Trump
Mhm.
victory there. So it definitely, I will for sure remember this year of this election and all the time and things that I spent on it. And I'll get more of my thoughts into the film itself, but I do feel also the film is, in a way, has aged incredibly well in terms of very prescient and the themes and things that it touches on. I think you could
Mhm.
read this into, especially the last like couple of elections, especially with Donald Trump and that political movement. I think a lot of the things that this movie is calling out as risks to what politics might become, I think it already has become this. And in a way, like Warren Beatty, I think maybe was able to see the writing on the wall even back in the 90s. But we'll get into the thoughts in the film in a bit. So curious if you had seen this movie or heard of it. It's actually kind of, in a way, is sort of forgotten. It's hard
Mhm.
to track down, and Warren Beatty is definitely faded in terms of his star power pretty quickly after this. Is not someone that people talk about a lot because he doesn't act or direct really much anymore. So I'm curious on your thoughts on Bulworth, and I'll get into more of my analysis of the film.
Yeah, I'd heard of it, hadn't watched it. Yeah, you're right. Like Warren Beatty is not thought of or talked about in the common public sphere, but I do know in Hollywood he's very admired. And I always wondered why that was, because I haven't
Hmm.
seen everything of his, and slowly over the years I've been watching his stuff. And I think this was a very important watch to understand that, because there are, many sort of multi-hyphenated actors, right, who've done stuff. And clearly Warren Beatty stands in his own league as compared to Redford and some of his other contemporaries. And I think this movie made me see that, because it's a pretty daring movie to make and a very daring performance. But yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm curious to hear more of your thoughts on the statement it's making, but I definitely agree with the part that ultimately this is all in favor of the rich serving the rich. And that whole debate scene where he shows up really crystallizes it for me, where he's the liberal candidate and there's then Republican candidate, and they're sort of, by then Warren Beatty's character has not slept in days and has had this whole adventure and is sort of just truth telling, something is sort of flipped inside of him. And the stuff he says that, let's just have a drink, like this is all make believe, right? Where media and people with money have sort of pitted people against us as if we were sports teams, which is sort of how I
Hmm.
feel. I didn't grow up here in this country. So to me, this sort of bipartisan system definitely sort of feels very much like that. Like that if you're born in one or somehow you've fallen into one party, then that's where you just have to be no matter what. And it's not about policies, it's not about who the people are, it's just blinded by all of this. And I think the movie really calls that. And I do want to get more into the thoughts of the movie. If the movie fully lands this message and is it fully successful or no, I have question marks on that. That said, I think the statements it's making, I that definitely resonates and definitely lands on me. And it's quite entertaining as well at the same time. That song, Every Day is a Holiday, Holiday, it's stuck in my head. Don't stop not singing that song.
Yeah, I think that the debate moment too is one that when I first saw this movie around 2000, which is the first election I got to vote in, because again, it kind of flopped. I didn't see it when it came out. I don't think I
Mm,
would have been interested. And that scene where he basically says, "Look, like to his opponent, like I'm a millionaire, you're a millionaire. All the
right.
news media that are interviewing us, you guys are all millionaires. We're just a bunch of millionaires talking about questions and answering questions that the millionaire donors who own this cable network, both of our campaigns, and just a bunch of rich people talking to each other. Like, what are we even doing here?" That
Right.
I will every single debate I've ever seen going forward, at least in the United States, I think about that line because it is true. You're like, wait a second, like how
It's
much money are
so
these
true.
anchors making really? Do they understand at all what the vast majority of the voters are going through? No, they don't. None of these people do. And I think what this movie at the time, this was a new statement, like you said about, oh, that's all the rich and this is all just a game. It wasn't so much in mainstream discussion, especially in the media, we're never talking these ways. And I think what has been going on over the last 10 years or so is now it's like the cat's out of the bag. Like everyone sort of knew it, and now everyone's talking
Right.
about it. And then I think that helps open the doors to much like what Warren Beatty's doing in this movie too, just like, oh, I'm just going to tell the truth and say whatever I want, and people like that authenticity, even though he's in the front of the black church being like, look, we don't care about you guys. Like you're nothing to us. I don't know why you're even
Right.
keep voting for us. Like those sort of
Yeah.
things.
Or the Jewish folks
And
of
the
like, you
Jewish
make
folks with the
terrible
Hollywood,
movies and
right?
Hollywood and it's all bad. Yeah.
Right, it's all bad, but in a way, like that helps him gain popularity. And I think that you can read into a lot of the movement, especially in the US with Trump, but a lot of these populist movements
Definitely.
around the world. Look, even though a lot of people say, oh, I hate the guy, but like, hey, I sort of like the way that he's blunt and just tells it like it is, even if I know
Yeah.
that he's lying. And now going back and seeing this in sort of the post-Trump kind of
Totally.
takeover in the US, I'm like, damn, like Warren Beatty was onto something here. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, at least from my perspective, like the bad guys took that and used it to win because I think this movie does a lot of
Yeah.
great commentary on just how feckless the other side is. I mean, it's the beginning. I love the opening shot actually when he's in his office and the
Yeah.
camera's panning back on him as a liberal politician in California, and you see him meeting with all these like real radical people pushing for actual change on the wall, and then it's down to him watching his campaign commercial where he's like, "Oh, welfare is out of control, and we need to stop the poor people from getting all
Right.
this money." And it's like, what a disconnect! Like where the people that were, talking about revolution in the 70s and he's posing with them, now he's trying to take money away from poor people and he's on the Democratic side. Like this
Right.
is crazy. And I think that is even more and more self-evident now in terms of where we're at just as a country. But yeah,
Yeah.
in terms of the film, I think, yes, Warren Beatty's performance definitely carries it. I think he's a very daring role that he took on here. And I think he does a great
He
job
commits
with
totally, I think.
absolutely commits to this, and it's a very weird kind of character which you have to kind of buy that he's, yeah, again, he's taking a hit out on himself, like he's totally not interested in anything anymore, but then throughout the evolution of this movie he starts to get that spirit back and realizing because he's involving himself with a lot of the more underserved members of the community, specifically the black community in this movie is
Right.
very racialized in that way. I think then he becomes reinvigorated again. That being said, like I said, the movie ages incredibly well in terms of the political message, but I think the racial politics is very 90s. The way that they talk about race, the way that they portray these
Hmm.
different like South Central black families and things and the kids in the streets and all this stuff. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, like I'm not saying it's wrong or like this movie needs to be canceled, but I'm like, this feels very
This
1998.
feels dated.
That part felt incredibly dated to
Yeah.
me. But I still think the movie is entertaining, even though it does come across as it's a vanity project from the outset. Of like, this
Yeah.
is my Warren Beatty. I'm going to star in it. I'm going to write it. I'm going to direct it. These are my very specific political viewpoints and where things are at. And that's a knock on him at all.
No.
But it's that part of it sometimes can rub me a little bit of the wrong way or it gets a little creakier at times. I'm like, are you doing this because you want another scene where you can do
Right.
something kind of crazy versus focus on something else beyond just every shot has to have you in it, Warren Beatty? But I think about it every election cycle, especially like the scenes that we mentioned too. And the plot thread of the insurance company that he's fighting up
Mm,
against, it's not even free healthcare, it's just taking away some of what the insurance company is able to make money on. And they end up basically like assassinating him, like the insurance
right.
company. And just funny having watched just in the context of what's going on now, where the insurance
Right.
companies
Oh
are
my
being
gosh.
targeted by an
Yeah.
assassination. I'm like, whoa, this is oddly still relevant in a
It's
weird
still
way. Like that
relevant.
just hit me in a very weird way on this rewatch. I'm like,
Oh
oh,
my gosh. I didn't even think about that. That
it's
is
so,
so true.
it's so weird.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to say was, I mean, Halle Berry looks amazing, but like that whole plot line that she is sort of the hired gun and also the performance just feels very flat to me. And that whole part just doesn't really come together. But then on Warren Beatty, yeah, there's a little bit of that self indulgence for sure. But also, I think if you were really truth telling, I don't know, I would have, in a more realistic sense, I know it's a farce, but I think what would have made the themes land even harder to me would have been that, yeah, not only does he get assassinated, but by the end of it, a little bit of Trumpian thing starts to happen with him, where yeah, he starts out truth telling and things start to go in some sort of, quote unquote positive direction. But then the truth is we're all still humans, right? Like when you get that kind of adulation from especially people that you haven't gotten it from, and you're kind of becoming this mass kind of leader of sorts, it is going to mess up with you in some way or the other. And the fact that we don't see that, and then it ends up being a little bit about sort of a love between him and Halle Berry, that makes no sense. at all. I'm like, where did this come from? That when that kiss happens, I'm like, where did that come from? I mean, sure, he's attracted to her and intrigued by her, and I get all of that. But how did we get to this moment? All of that felt very indulgent to me. And the fact that, yeah, this is supposed to be like a now a forever change person who's going to do right, that it doesn't work out that way. You don't flip like that.
Right, right. I think on the Halle Berry piece, that is one of those things in terms of the romance and the kiss and everything and the sexual tension between them. That is one of these. It's a vanity project. I'm Warren Beatty.
Yeah.
I want to make out with Halle Berry because it's
Yeah.
similar to why we were just talking about that episode with Clint Eastwood. And so many movies he's directed, he just beds 22-year-old women for no
Oh my
reason just because, like,
gosh.
look, I'm the director, like I get to make out with a 22-year-old. So I think it's a lot of that doesn't work. But I actually like that the ending of this movie is a call to action in a way, which I really do like, where there's a theme in one of the raps where he mentions about like, don't be a ghost, like be a spirit, and our spirits are
Oh,
with
yeah,
people.
yeah, yeah.
Spirits are people that have like something to say, basically. And at the end of the movie, when Beatty's character does get shot and you're unsure whether he'll ever survive, the homeless person comes back on the street and sort of gives that same dialogue directly to the camera. And I think that giving that message of, don't be a ghost, which is what we were talking about earlier when you were mentioning like people just be complacent, kind of give up in the face of injustice and stuff. No, you don't want to do that. You want to find
Mhm.
something that drives him, but it's about you, like putting that message forward in the same way that Warren Beatty kind of comes around in this movie too. So I think if it was ended on a downer and like the movie was more about what power does to you, like a face in the crowd type situation.
That's what I meant to say.
Yeah,
Yeah, face the
that
crowd.
I think it would have countered the message of this film, which is
That's
basically
true.
trying to say, no, like you should
There's
speak the
hope.
truth to power, and it's up to you because, we're supposedly in a democracy, so the voters can organize and push and like look for the people that are telling the truth. I think that's why I do like the very ending of this movie when it's like, oh, be
Yeah.
like a spirit, don't be a ghost, like don't
I
just kind
do
of give
love that
up.
line a lot, actually. Yeah.
It's cool. I do like that the movie does end with a positive note because so many of these movies could be like everything is screwed, like we're dead, like everything's why bother, like just give up, or like oh everything's gonna turn out to be bad anyway, so never trust any like that sort of nihilistic
Right.
view of it. I like that, and this is again just like Warren Beatty's viewpoint too of like trying to put some optimism into it, even though it looks like it's completely just all BS, which it is. I think some yeah, it's all BS, but that doesn't mean we can't start changing things if people start kind of telling the truth and waking up, for lack of a better word, too. And I think that's true, though, in a way that's already kind of happening, but just for the wrong policies that come along with that is what's happening in this country, in my view. But I think it would have hurt the movie to turn it into something like a face in the crowd or those other types of like all politicians are bad things,
Are
which are
bad.
important. Those movies are important too. I'm not at
True.
all. I mean, I love that film, and I think those are important messages too. But I think the message Warren Beatty's trying to say in this is like we got to find our spirit again. We've lost it from the politicians to the voters to the whole system has sort of like corrupted everything, and we got to start changing. And it just starts with you as the homeless person is sort of implying, I think,
Yeah.
at the end of the film.
I agree. I agree. Yeah, I think it was just a juxtaposition of that and the kiss that I was like, okay, like you're now everything is perfect now for you. And
Oh,
that's
right.
sort of what I was taking from that.
Yeah.
That, of course, I mean, he gets shot. So there's that.
I was gonna
But
say not everything's perfect for him. He might be
it's not everything is
dead.
perfect. But up to that point, I was sort of feeling a little bit gross, especially when that kiss happens. I was like,
Oh,
oh, what
yeah.
is it's just not, this is not right.
It's unnecessary. They
It's
were they didn't.
unnecessary. It's
Yeah.
not earned at all. Like, how
Hmm.
did we get here, sort of thing? And that now that you're become this kind of messiah sort of person and everything is right, and she is rooting for you, even though she was wanting to kill you like 5 seconds before, like it just starts to tie too neatly. That's kind of what I was reacting to.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. Like, I think ending on a more call to action, but also hopeful note is a good thing, actually, as opposed to a nihilistic that everybody is bad and everyone is screwed up. Even though I do think this is how I think of politicians. I'm just jaded, no matter
Mhm.
which side they come from. That's my own bias.
Sure,
I
sure, sure.
guess. But they don't start all that way. I will say that. But I think there's something that happens, and
Well, I mean, it's the same
there's
thing we are
something
saying
in the
about
gene.
Hollywood in a way too, right? Like the system can
Yeah,
show the bad sides in you and it attracts certain people that are okay with that. And then so I
true.
think of it as a systems thing, and that there are ways out of it. And maybe change is not
Yeah,
through politicians either. They're not the only people that are in control, or at least
no,
in the United States, in control of things. Like we can organize, we can do things outside of that system
right,
to enact
exactly.
change and push for what we want.
Exactly. And nobody is lionized, worth lionizing per se, and nobody's worth I mean, some people are worth taking down and being thrown away, but
Yes,
most
right.
people are in the middle,
Right, right.
I
No, yeah,
think.
exactly right. There are few people
Yeah.
that deserve the lionization that they get, and there's few people that deserve to get eaten by a lion. So,
Yeah.
okay, let's move on to our number ones now. So, what is your number one movie that represented 2024 to you?
Speaking of eating, my number one, no lions were eaten in the making or the viewing of this movie, just as a disclaimer. But my number one is The Taste of Things from, again, 2023, directed by An Hung Tran, starring Juliette Binoche, Benoit Magimel, Emmanuel Salinger. Quick logline: the story of Eugene, an esteemed cook in Dodin, fine gourmet chef she has been working for over the last 20 years. So, similar to the Perfect Days movie, I knew about this movie. I'm a big food person. I love to cook. I think about food. If I'm not thinking about movies, pretty much, I would say equal proportions. So, this movie was kind of made for me, but I was so bummed that I just couldn't see it last year. And I finally watched it actually by myself on like a Thursday evening, just
Mm.
cooked something simple and just watched it, and was just overcome completely by this movie. And I'll obviously get into my thoughts with the movie, but yes, this movie is about cooking and the art of it and the technique and the work that goes into it, and how it can be a life's work. But I think what really sort of landed on me with this movie, in addition to that, is just love and life, and how food and taking care of one another through food and the joy we bring to each other is such an essential part of that. And, when the movie starts, I mean, the first 10 minutes of the movie is like this silent movie scene of just them preparing and cooking, and it's like an action sequence to me,
Hmm.
like this is out of a Mission Impossible movie. So it's a set piece where all these things are happening, there's no dialogue, and you just are sitting at the edge of your seat just watching and taking all this in while your mouth is salivating and you want to be there and you just totally take it in. But then as the movie progresses, it sort of reveals so much more about her relationship to this famous chef. And you think at one point that, oh, she's just the cook in the background, but then you see the love the two of them have with each other and power she holds in the relationship. But also, it's not been easy for these two to come together. What it says about cooking and putting your art in front of you as an exploration and an expression of yourself and who you love, as opposed to an expression of just pure show that you see with another character who's like a princely kind of rich person who shows up later. So it's making a lot of commentaries on sort of society as well. But to me, this movie is really about love and life. And this is what I felt this year, because I moved in with my partner. We got engaged. We also did like a court marriage thing a few weeks ago. So it was a big year for that. And I think just living together, cooking. I mean, I do most of the cooking. Let's just be honest about
Let's not.
that.
We don't need to call him out on this.
Yeah, I'm not showing up in the true spirit of the movie by doing that. Am I?
Yeah.
I'm not. But that's just me. So,
Yeah.
but cooking and taking care of each other, and once again finding the joy and love in between the lines, but also showing up and putting in the work. Like, I think you can take this movie as just I'm making great dishes, but you can take it as I'm showing up for this person and this moment that I believe in, even though I'm ill and I'm sick and I'm distracted or something is weighing me, but I show up, because that's what has to be done. Had you watched this movie before?
I had not. It was similar to Perfect Days where
Yeah,
I wanted to see it. I heard the good things about it. Just end of 2023. Like you
right.
said, spoiler rich, just too many other movies, and this kind of slipped through the cracks. And I kind of forgotten about it, to be honest, until I saw this on the list. And I was like, oh, great, nice. I can finally have the time to watch Taste of Things. And I thought it was great, especially like the first like 15 minutes, like you were describing, where there's really nothing going on except them making the food, and you can taste it, you can smell it, the sounds. We
Oh.
talk about mise en scène a lot in this podcast, so just about all the things kind of working together. This was an example of meals en scène, where I felt like I was in the kitchen. I felt like I could taste the food as they were putting every little thing in the dish. And I am not someone who cooks or really knows how to cook. I love eating a
Right.
great meal, but what it was so cool about this first part is, I don't really think about like how the meal was prepared and the different ways they make things and having to, cut this here and then I, do this, melt this thing and put the like. So it was fascinating for me to be like, oh, this is really cool, like about all the different ways, the different steps involved to get to then that final dish when they share it. So that was just educational, I guess, or fascinating to me. Thought that was really cool, and definitely the focus on food as art and an expression of what this chef and then the love that he feels for Juliette Binoche's character is expressed through the food. It is his art, and that is what he is expressing.
Hmm.
And when he, loses her, that kind of light goes out in him, and he can't make his art for a while anymore because she was his muse, she was his inspiration. She is a person and a chef and all those sort of things, but obviously it was the love that he had for her that was what kept him going there. And it also got me thinking too, just about food as just an art form, as it's the only like kind of art form you have to destroy every time. Like they make a meal, it
Hmm.
only lasts once, basically. And as to enjoy it, you have to destroy it. It's not like you look at a painting or watch a movie or listen
Right.
to it. You're literally getting rid of what this person just made. And I don't know, it's you kind of, but it's becoming a part of you. I was thinking about all these things and watching this in terms
Mm.
of what the art of cooking, which is something I super appreciate. I know I'm not good at it. I really enjoyed the film, especially again those scenes just there in the kitchen for 10 minutes and amazing.
I'm not great either. I mean, I like to cook, but
No,
I'm
you're good,
also not
man.
a.
You've cooked for me. You're good. Don't sell yourself short here. Come on.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But it's like an endless reservoir, right? Of sort of learning and getting better. It'll be like a lifelong thing. And I enjoy that. But I'm also not like a stress-free cook. When we're hosting like two people,
Yeah.
I'm like running amok, on my own volition. And I've had to be reminded by Robert, my partner, of like, this is for enjoyment. May I remind you? And they're like, oh yeah, right. I'm doing this for because I love this. Because I get so caught up in like, oh, what if I like mess this up? What if this goes wrong? And it was a reminder just watching this movie of just enjoying not just food and the preparation of it, but just also just life. And again, going back to the time is luck thing that you were saying earlier, like I think this movie starts with food, and that's obviously the obvious takeaway, but it ends up shining a bigger light on just being present and enjoying every moment you have, showing up for the people you love. And then in terms of just the actual preparation, like that first scene, I mean, I aspire to that. These two people and their helper person, they have such a shorthand that's not verbal. It's not even through sign language. It's nothing. It's just felt that they can prepare these meals with absolutely not a word said. What a thing to aspire to, in a lifetime. I'm not just even saying this about preparing food, but like anything of the work you do, the people you hang out with, that you have such chemistry and understanding and patience and love for them and with them, that you can just function like a well-oiled machine with a smile on your face, enjoying every moment of it. Like it was breathtaking. Just watch that. Can this even happen in life? And then I guess the other angle we should mention in the movie is of this little girl who walks in, who's kind of like a protege. And,
Yeah.
I love that angle. It's sort of a symbolism of the daughter or the child that they probably could have had, but also just recognizing great talent.
Hmm.
And there's not jealousy here, neither between the two of them, nor between them and this little girl. Because sometimes a master, at least as we've seen and portrayed in film and television, that when like a new incumbent comes, it rattles them up. That would be a very different kind of movie. And I would
Right.
love a Salieri Mozart
Mm.
showdown. I'm totally down
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah.
But this is not that. And often that happens. And sometimes this happens where you want to nurture this person and make them be better. So I love how that kind of turn happens. And in a way, spoiler alert, Juliette Binoche's character dies in the movie, but her light is sort of carried forward through this little girl in a way. And then talk about mise en scène, how this movie is shot. I don't know if they shot this with natural light or no, but it feels like that. It had very like Barry Lyndon sort of
Definitely.
vibes in this little French cottage that they live in and cook in. And it's just so beautiful and transportive, and but not self-indulgent. A movie on food, chef's table, like we live in that world, right? Like,
Right.
okay, I'm going to spend 8 hours with this really celebrated, difficult, but master chef kind of person who's very particular, peculiar, but a pain in the ass and cares about this direction of the smoke that comes when I lift the glass of this potato and that I cultivated myself with like, blah, blah, blah. Go on, right?
Hmm.
I'm over that. And this movie, yes, it has elements of perfection and all of that, but it doesn't feel self indulgent to me. It actually feels simple. Like good art doesn't have to be overly complicated. It can be simple to the point that when they're making or deciding to make a big menu for this rich guy who's showing up, he just decides to make like a very simple peasant dish,
Right. Right.
not a showdown showstopper with 20 courses,
Hmm.
So this movie definitely did a number on me in many respects, and I can't wait to watch it again.
Yeah, yeah, me too. I think this is also a good kind of mood piece in a way too, like similar to a Miami Vice, where it just sort of is on in sort of the background and the periphery, and just those scenes of them cooking was like really
Yeah.
relaxing to me in a way of like all
Yeah.
I think a lot of it had to do with the lighting, like you said, warm light, the way the camera was moving around the kitchen too is just so well shot. And yeah, all the sounds and yeah, it's kind of fun, like the preparation of food, like that whole vibe and environment. I really liked what this movie captured there, and I would definitely want to watch this again too. Though I will watch it after I eat next time. I did not eat before I watched this. It was a giant mistake. I was like, oh
What
crap,
did you
like
eat after you watched it?
nah, unfortunately, it was leftover chicken from a meal that I made myself the night before. So at least it was a home cooked meal. I cook very rarely for
That's good
myself, so
at
I cooked the
least.
other night. So I'm like,
That's
oh,
good.
okay, well, this is not going to be anything like I just saw, unfortunately. But I can imagine, I guess, that I'm eating some incredibly prepared French peasant dish instead. It's just like very light, marinated chicken, basically.
That sounds pretty good, at least homemade.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. As much as yeah, I can say it was homemade. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I guess two other things to add. So Juliette Binoche and Benoit Magimel, like they were married. They have a daughter, but they're separated in real
Oh.
life now.
Oh, they were
And
married when they were making this. They were
no,
in.
way before, a long
Okay,
time
okay. So
ago.
they. Okay, okay, okay. Oh, okay.
But
I
they're
didn't
in
know
each
that.
other's lives because of the child they share, and but they've not acted since they separated together. So I think it's like a genius kind of stroke of casting because you definitely feel this kind of otherworldly chemistry they have. And not all that doesn't always translate between real life to the screen, but here as these characters you definitely feel that
Yeah.
that lived in kind of relationship that they've had, and now this relationship is kind of moving to a different step, how she's been kind of reticent to getting married or sort of being tied down in some way, even though she feels the love for him, but he's totally head over heels. And like you said, she's kind of amused to him as well. So yeah, it's a very lived in relationship that you see without much being said, even though grand gestures are made of love and what have you. So I just want to call that out. Like it's just amazing chemistry between the two of them, but especially Juliette Binoche, who I think is one of my favorite actresses living of all time. She's in that pantheon.
Mm.
I mean, of course, she's delightful when she speaks and does something, but it's just all on her face. Like you just see everything. Like people give Isabelle Huppert that kind of mantle of I mean, she's amazing too, like the Meryl Streep
Yeah,
of
she's amazing.
France. I think actually Juliette Binoche is Meryl Streep, Francis Meryl Streep, sorry. Although that too. And it
Yeah.
was fun to see at this year's Cannes Film Festival where Meryl was awarded with like a Lifetime Achievement Award. Juliette Binoche is the one who presented her and
Oh,
was completely in tears talking about her. And it was like a nice moment to see the two of them share stage. Should we move on to your number one?
yeah, I can wrap up the episode here. So, my number one film that represented 2024 to me, it shaped my 2024, is the film Children of Men from 2006. This is a movie directed and co-written by Alfonso Cuarón and starring Julianne Moore, Clive Owen. The IMDb plot summary: in 2027, in a chaotic world in which women have somehow become infertile, a former activist agrees to help transport a miraculously pregnant woman to a sanctuary at sea. First off, I do this kind of every year where I go back and sort of try to fill in gaps of directors that I like that I've never seen their earlier work. So I did in January do that with Alfonso Cuarón. So I had never seen a lot of his earlier Mexican films. This movie then I had to go watch because it's my favorite one of his
Mm-hmm.
films. So I rewatched it earlier in the year, and The biggest kind of reason why for me this is my number one film is 2027 that they show in this film to me felt even more so, like incredibly prescient. And the themes of this movie too around nihilism and doomerism and all these things and how really just absolutely in a terrible state the world is, even more so this year than in years past. I mean, there's obviously horrible wars going on in the Middle East, climate disasters like we've never had in the United States. I think the second most like billion-dollar climate disasters have happened, killed 500 people across the US. Things seem to be looking worse and worse, and we're definitely trending in a downward direction, in my opinion, just as a species, that there will be a bottom, but it's not going to happen anytime soon, unfortunately. And it's very easy, at least for me, to sometimes get caught up in the mentality a lot of people have of like, okay, what's the point? The planet's going to burn and we're all going to die, and all these, horribly nihilistic things, which I think going back to something that you had said earlier, it's like, what's the point, right? Shrug and kind of give up. I think it is easy sometimes to fall into that trap.
Hmm.
And I have to be constantly reminding myself, which is again the theme of this movie, is there is hope at the end of this.
Hmm.
And what does that mean? And you have to find that in your life somehow, whether it's through family or friends or a passion. Maybe it's cooking, like in the taste of things that we had, something that you enjoy that you can hold on to as everything else is sort of crumbling, but then think that there will be something better at the end of this. There's a political bookstore that I like to go to, and there was sale for posters one day, and a lot of these posters were like, oh, all the sorrows in the world, and things about all the people that have been killed by our economic system, and all these sort of things. But I bought the two of them that were the optimistic, there will be a brighter future, and this great quote by one of the Black Panthers just talking about how one day this will all be over, and these repressions we're under, there will be freedom at the end of this, and that is what I decided to buy that day, because I do really want to try to have this revolutionary optimism and thinking, yeah, it is recognizing that things are definitely trending in a very bad direction everywhere, but that doesn't mean that can affect you, even when it comes to your own personal life. Like, this is a very hard year for me, just on a personal level too, that I'm dealing with a lot of different things that were hard to get through. And sometimes it's easy, much like Clive Owen's character in this movie too, who was hurt by a personal tragedy of his child passing away, to give up and turn your back on things. But
Hmm.
I just believe you have to find things in your life that are those good things, and then look ahead to, maybe it might not be next year, it might be the next 10 years. My opinion is more like the next 50 or 60. But at the end of that, this will be a better world, and there will be more happiness and joy that is spread around. So I'll get more into the film and what the movie, kind of how they represent that. But that to me is why this was the movie that I will always remember 2024 about, because it's that trying to find the optimism and just the total blackness of the society and the world that we live in today and will be living in, I think, maybe even for the rest of our lives. But the next generation then something will turn around. It will get better. And I'd have to keep reminding myself of that.
Yeah. And I would sort of, watching this movie, I've seen this before for sure, but watching this movie, especially in this year, but in concert with the movies that I brought, which is that you actually don't have to wait for the next generation, because every little brighter spot of kindness or personal passion or whatever little deed we do, we actually make things a little bit better just in the moment, you know?
Hmm.
And it's all those little moments which actually add up to bigger things. I really believe in that. And we've been saying throughout this entire podcast, like, just show up, first
Hmm.
of all, and be kind as much as you can. I think we have a lot of power actually in humanity to not just make like big changes that would be impacting future generations, but just little things day to day. And it's actually the little things that lead to big change. I don't really think of one fine day like a big sweeping change is going to happen. It's all incremental, it's all gradual. So if I keep that mindset, it's actually not that dark, because we're not doomed. We are
Yeah.
doing things even today, or can do things even today, to just make things better. It doesn't have to be a big grand gesture,
Right, or it can sometimes. I mean, it's
or
like
it
it's
can.
like both can happen. Is sort of, I think,
Right,
where I try to remind myself of. You
right,
want the big things, and sometimes
right,
they happen out of nowhere that are a big
right,
surprise, and all of a sudden, boom! Like, okay, something big happened, and this is a positive step. Or it can be a lot of smaller things, even just in your
right.
own personal life, or just thinking about things you can do to help with other things going on in the world in some way. Because every little thing, if everyone does something little, it sort of adds up to something bigger. And it's easy to lose sight of that. And I think sometimes too, like the whole doom pilled, black pilled, whatever you want to call it, of these people that
Hmm.
are just nihilists, essentially, like that is what the people in control want. They want you to give up
Right.
and sort of like just roll over and keep getting it like as you've been getting it for, however long it is. So the victory of not being nihilist, I think, is getting one over on them anyway, too. Not giving up no matter what. I mean, no matter how bad things look and how bad things are, which they are, you have to recognize that too. But if you keep your head up and try to find that joy somewhere, like that is a victory in and of itself. Which I
Totally.
think this movie it does it in a dramatic fashion, obviously,
Right.
because it is a big film about a lot of big things. But I think that is what I always take away from this film. And maybe we should get a little into the film. So
Hmm.
you'd seen the movie before. Like, this is my favorite
Yeah.
of his films, and
I think it's his best,
the
I
more I go
think.
back to it, the more I just appreciate it just as a cinematic work. But
Yeah.
then, like I said, I think it just becomes more and more prescient in terms of the things that we face and the challenges we face in the world today.
Yeah, and I love it how it captures that. Of course, it's a hard watch, it's a thrill ride. It actually reminded me a lot of Civil War, a movie that we were sort of mixed on
Oh yeah, I didn't
this
like that film.
year.
Yeah.
But it kind of this is how, again, not to put the two against each other, but like this to me is like a way more successful way of capturing that. It has
Hmm.
different themes and messages on its mind, obviously, but it still reminded me of that. It's propulsive, and there's something about setting this movie and these themes in this kind of futuristic but yet very relatable kind of world that
Hmm.
somehow lands in a very different way, where it makes it very tactile, that you can see it, and because it's in a near future, it sort of has, I don't know if you felt this, but watching it this time, it made me think of, oh, this could be placed at any point in time in the history of mankind. Because,
Right.
and
The
that
story.
sort of
Yeah.
is the story. But I think the visual and the setting of that kind of helps with that. Because this world, which feels sort of relatable, but also different, this could be 1800s or 20,000s or 3,000. It could be any time, right? Which sort of makes the point that these things that this movie is talking about, which we are dealing with now, people have been dealing with these for millennia. They always will. Yeah, sometimes things will get worse, sometimes things will get better, but this will keep happening. And it is upon us, like you said, that we have to show up and have that hope. And it's true, if you look back at history, this has always been happening in some form or the other. It might be worse now. Some might argue it was worse. I mean, imagine going through the world wars. What was that like? Or imagine going through massive plagues. What
Right.
was that like?
Hmm.
So it kind of, I don't know, universalizes all this, but also shines just the power of hope and humanity that we've been through this.
Yeah, setting it in a, near distant future back in 2006, where it does
Yeah.
feel present but a little bit not.
Removed. Yeah.
Right, is a great way, I think, to not put too much distance between the themes and the modern world we're living in. Like sci-fi, what's so great about it is, yeah, this could be set
Exactly.
on Mars in the year 4000, whatever, and tell the exact same story, and then you can read an allegory into, oh, this is sort of like what it is today. But I think this movie is trying to be like, no, this is basically today, or it will be very
Right.
soon. So to try to like make sure to drive the point a little bit more home, I think that was, I mean, it's based on a book, so it obviously wasn't the screenplay that did that. But they could have set, to your point, they could have reset the book in whatever time they wanted. I don't even know when the book came out.
It
Maybe it
still
came
work.
out in earlier decades, and it still works. But it's just interesting in terms of a lot of the, especially with what's going on, bring back to the elections and the issue of, I think fake issue of immigration that we have in this country right now. And basically both parties are fighting over who could be more mean to immigrants. And the person that won is promising to do exactly what is shown in this movie, which is round up people in camps that are not from the specific country that this is England in the film.
Mm.
But that is what essentially the political candidate who won the presidential election is saying, oh, I want to do children of men here. And so people were like, okay, cool, let's do that without maybe even realizing what it looks like. But I was watching this movie being like, oh yeah, like this is what that might look like if it happens or would look like if it does in another time. And it hits more to me in terms of like the
Mm.
doomerism part of it, because Clive Owen's character even says like, oh, what is it, there's some line in the movie he says about like, oh, it doesn't matter, the world is shit anyway. In the beginning he's
Mm.
totally disengaged from everything. He just kind of
Yeah.
walking through life like a zombie. And there's a great scene too with his cousin I think it's his cousin where he goes and visits him in the old like water tower from the Pink Floyd album. And his cousin's basically just been collecting all this art and also sort of
Yeah.
like, who cares? Like completely
He's just
given
living
up
in the
too.
past.
Living in the past, right? Just holding on to this stuff that doesn't matter. Like who cares? Because
Yeah.
when the humanity dies out because no one's having kids anymore, who cares that you have this, Michelangelo's David? And he's like, oh, I
Right.
just try not to think about it. And there are definitely those people. I think that is
Right.
the complacent people, which are like, yeah, the world's going to shit, but like I'm just gonna pretend it's not and just continue on doing
Right.
what I want to do. Like, no, like you shouldn't do that. You should do something,
Right.
about it and not just sort of hide off on some ivory tower. But what I like about the movie is that it does it very subtly. Like it's not really coming out and saying that or like poo-pooing this
Not
person or making them
speechifying.
into
Yeah.
or speechifying it at all. It's just sort of there.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, this is kind of interesting. And Clive Owen's evolution too into realizing like he should be trying to save potentially maybe the first of the hopefully beginning of the world being repopulated again. But I love the theme of
Yeah.
like the population stopping because that is a definite like end to the human race. Whereas the
Right.
things we're talking about now, with climate change, all these things, I don't think those are necessarily ends to the human race, but they're major threats to it. But it gives you
Hmm.
that same feeling of like, well, we have no future, which in this world they literally don't. But in our world, there are a lot of people that say, oh, we have no future. It's almost like people stop giving birth anymore in terms of the way that some people walk through the world just dealing with all this bad stuff. And I just again I like that this movie pushes back against that. And and
Right.
and Clive Owen's character does too, even though he dies in the end probably. I think the ending is just so amazing where it just kind of cuts the black and you hear children, like
Yeah.
laughing and stuff. It's like, oh, he did
Yeah.
it.
It's very powerful. Yeah. It's very powerful, very moving. And then, of course, we would be remiss if we didn't mention the car scene, which is
Oh my God,
obviously
yeah.
iconic from this movie, where your breath is just taken away, stopped. It's an out of body experience. Even though I watched it before, just watching it again this time, it was just like, oh my gosh, like how did they do this?
Hmm.
But you're not thinking about that when you're watching it. It's the day after. I was like, how did they do this? But
Yeah.
in the moment, you're just completely swept away.
Yeah, there's that set piece when they're in the car and under attack, and then the end of the film when he's going through the concentration camp, and
Right.
there's the army kind of coming in and fighting against these rebels, and it's a long, I think it's maybe like a 10-minute shot or something like that. Through that, it's just also completely harrowing. I mean, it transports you into that sense of destruction kind of all around you and you understand more like what Clive Owen is going through just the way that they shot that it's just he is we covered Gravity on this podcast at 1.2 and just another example of him just being able to use the techniques of filmmaking and get emotion out of you and how he's doing it
Yeah,
just he's one of our true like masters for sure and I think this movie again is the best he's ever made so far. I mean hopefully he'll make another amazing film soon but those two scenes always stand out. The craft in this film is just unbelievable, just
totally.
unbelievable.
Totally. And like you said, in service of the story, in service of the characters, and really evoking super strong emotion from you, but not in an indulgent way, even though it is very showy. Of course it
Right,
is.
right.
But for some reason, because it's in service to all those other things, it doesn't feel that way. It doesn't sort of stick out that, okay, here we go,
Hmm.
scene time, here we are. It doesn't feel that way. It feels earned. It builds up to it.
Yeah, and I think something you said earlier too about the movie being like kind of propulsive and moving, like
Yeah.
this, it's like getting on a ride and just keeps going. You sort of, it doesn't draw attention to these things because it's in a way it's kind of like a chase movie, sort of,
Yeah.
and how Clive Owen gets kidnapped and then they're getting chased throughout the rest of the film once he sees the woman pregnant to try to get her to this boat, and that I think makes you those scenes that could be very showy, like you said, not feel that way because the movie just keeps moving and moving and moving. It's not
Right.
drawing, oh, this is a big set piece, and now let's sort of relax afterwards and feel the moment of the emotions from that because you're right on to the next thing. Like you can't think about that car scene to your point because there's immediately
No,
something else is happening.
there's no
Immediately something else
time.
is
You're dead.
happening.
You'll be dead.
Right? Exactly. Yeah.
I
It
mean,
just
you feel that as an audience, like to your
right,
point. Like, you
right.
can't think about the past.
Yeah, and I also appreciate that this movie, speaking of the indulgent piece too, like could have been long, and it's not. It's like under two
Mm,
hours. It's almost like an hour and a half, kind of. There's not a
mm,
lot there to it, which definitely this could have been, a 3 hour movie
bloated.
about some epic of the end of, but no, it's like very tight and lean, and I also
Yeah.
love how he's able to be so economical, and that I think that helps also get away with some of these more showier things that could have stood out in a 3.5 hour movie or something, which just would not have been as good. Like the story just sort of stripped down to the bare bones of what exactly needs to be said, and not big speeches, overindulgent, put you over the head with it. It's just a one
Yeah.
character going through this arc of being a nihilist and then finding hope and then doing something about it and then being
Right.
happy that he did at the end. I mean, I think
Yeah.
he's like, great, I did what I was supposed to do, even though
Yeah.
he is probably dead. I think it's
Yeah.
pretty much he doesn't make it, but humanity makes it because she makes it to the
Humanity
boat.
makes it, exactly. No, I
Yes, you
couldn't agree more. Like, this is just such a tight movie, and that's why it's so powerful and impactful. Otherwise, it would lose the meaning. And frankly, it wouldn't be true to its themes and the time period and what it's trying to say. Because in a world like this, there wouldn't be time to sit around and talk.
right,
It
right.
just wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, we couldn't sit around and have a podcast. We have to keep moving.
No.
So yeah, that was our episode of movies that shaped our 2024. Hopefully this gets you guys thinking about movies that also shaped your 2024, and definitely let us know in the comments below which ones you thought. But this was always a joy. I really do like this episode. And actually, because this is the last one of the year, I think this is a great year of a lot of great analysis we put out. And thanks listeners too for sticking with us. This is an evolution of our format. We got a lot of positive feedback from the community, so that's great. And we'll definitely be continuing on into 2025.
Yeah, no, excited for that. And yeah, echo Alex's sentiments. Thank you to everybody for comments and also critiques and how we've gone on to this new journey. And it's been fun kind of being in LA, like you said, Alex, to kind of just meet up and plot through our machinations together in person. So that's been really fun too. But also like reflecting on this list of movies, I was thinking about that. They all sort of mesh with each other in a way,
Yeah.
and we've had that before too, that even though we come at it from different experiences with different things that are happening in our lives, but they end up presenting a more fuller picture of what we've been feeling, and hopefully that resonates with other people as well, where there are dark times, there are hard times, in the world, but also in people's lives and families and such. But then there are also moments of consideration and joy, and we have to make time for those and show up for those. And I love sort of how our lists kind of support that.
Yeah. No, they're in dialogue with one another, which
They're in dialogue with each other. Exactly.
which happens a lot in this older format. It was always fine. It was always interesting how that happens, because we are two totally different people with two totally different experiences, but through the movies we can find commonality, which is really cool.
Yeah.
So yeah,
All right.
listeners, we like I said, we're coming back in 2025. As normal, we take a bit of a break, so we won't be on your feed in 2 weeks. But hang tight, like we'll definitely be back in early next year for sure. By the time the Oscars, we'll do our annual Oscars recap and coverage, and then get back into covering some of the new releases from the artists that touch us the most.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, we'll see you in 2025.